We're now 3 games post All-Star break, and the outlook for the Philadelphia 76ers is already starting to look a little bit grimmer. In this video, I want to break down how Nick Nurse is addressing that, what the outlook for the team is for here, and how much the percentages for their playoff odds have already changed just 3 games into the restart of the season. So to kick things off, I want to talk a little bit more about that loss to the Bucks. These Sixers are 1-2 since the All-Star break has resumed, and most notably the matchup against the Bucks. I will say this is a brutal section of these schedules to have to attack without Joel Embiid. That facing the Knicks, facing the Cavs, facing the Bucks, and then the Celtics tomorrow, ripping off matchups against the top 4 teams in the East without your best player is a rough shake no matter how you cut it. But they do have to find a way to produce some sort of victories from here on out and keep their head above afloat. And now we do know that Nick Nurse is well aware. We'll begin by breaking down this quote here. Nick Nurse saying, quote, "We're trying to figure out all kinds of things. We put Batum at the 5. First time we've done that. We've got to do a better job of drive and kick style of basketball with this group. We need to get these guys a little more organized on the offensive end." And Batum himself spoke a little bit on the subject as well. That quote from Dan Ollinger, who was reporting that of the Rights to Ricky Sanchez podcast, that came post-game against the Bucks. This morning, Batum spoke to the media at practice, and I thought he had an interesting thought as well. Batum saying that the Sixers can find success offensively without Joel Embiid, but they need to move the ball more. Saying, quote, "We can't rely on Tyrese to get 50 every freaking time. That won't happen. We've got to find a way to move the ball more, change sides, not be a one-pass shot team." A lot of good stuff from both of these guys here, and they're kind of connected, which is why I want to lump them in here. For starters, playing Batum at the 5. That is the biggest indictment on Mo Bamba. I've been through my frustrations with Mo, and I will say that there have been highs as well. It hasn't been all bad with Mo Bamba, but it is very frustrating, and I thought the Bucks game was a firm example of it. It was the right move to pull his minutes. That for Mo Bamba to be one of the finite amount of players in the NBA with a size advantage on Giannis, he was just a sitting duck every time Giannis was attacking the paint. And for a guy to be 7 feet tall with a near 8-foot wingspan, to just be so lost when attempting to protect the rim is super frustrating. Now, I like Mo. I think he's a good human being, a good teammate, and a good guy to have on the team. But what he isn't is a reliable backup center, and that's why we're starting to see some of this Nick Nurse creativity, that the Sixers are leaning very much into this small ball style of play. We've seen matchups with Cam Payne, Kyle Lowry, and Tyrese Maxey all on the floor. We've also seen some 3-guard lineups with Maxey, Lowry, Buddy Hield. We've seen some Buddy Hield, Maxey, and D'Anthony Melton. D'Anthony Melton coming back to this team, playing a little bit of a combo guard role. There's a lot more ways that Nurse is attacking things. They're leaning very much into that small ball kind of mentality. They want to run and gun. Without Joel Embiid, that's the best way this team's going to produce points. But the other side of things is they're already having rebounding issues, and that's been something that dates back to this entire season, even with Joel Embiid on the floor. So there is a give and take with how this is going. Now, I did want to speak a little bit about, I'll start with the front and center of Tobias Harris. Now, I know I've been piling on Tobias. I know there's a specific video that I just dropped saying the Sixers have a Tobias Harris problem, and they absolutely do. Now, before I get all the people in the comments, I understand that he has his pros. He's not a horrible player, but what he is a guy that is not delivering to what the contract dictates. That when looking at the Sixers from a cap space perspective, Buddy Hield is the 3rd highest paid player on the Sixers right now. He's making just under $20 million per year. There are 2 players making higher. One is Joel Embiid making $47 million, and one is Tobias Harris making a shade under $40 million. For him making twice as much as Buddy Hield and significantly more than everyone else on the roster, the production is just not there. Now, it's not Tobias Harris's fault that he signed that contract. Obviously, the Sixers offered something that he likely, even in the best case of circumstances, could not fulfill. But just to lay into what the stats have been for Toby, since Joel Embiid's injury, there have been 11 games played for the Sixers. Tobias has played in 8 of them. In those matchups, he's averaging 33.3 minutes per game, producing 15.0 points, 6.5 rebounds, 4.1 assists, 1.5 steals, shooting just 45.5% from the field on 13.8 field goal attempts per game, and just 23.8% on three-point attempts on 2.6 per game, a minus 8.4 on average in those matchups. In the last 3 games alone, 30.6 minutes per game, 10.0 points per game, 7.0 rebounds, 2.3 assists, shooting a brutal 35.3% from the field on 11.3 field goal attempts per game, and just 25% from beyond the three-point arc on 2.7 three-point attempts per game. I get it. Sometimes the shots are going to come in, sometimes they're not. But we can't avoid the obvious here, that Tobias Harris is not good enough for what this team needs him to be, and frankly, it's time the Sixers look another direction. That as Nick Nurse wants to lean into these different variations, that he's playing all these different styles of play, one of those options should be to put Tobias Harris on the bench. And I get it. I don't realistically expect it to happen. For the same reason that I am overly critical of him for that $40 million cap hit, those $40 million that are hitting his bank account, those $400,000 that he's making for every single Sixers game, that's the same reason why he's going to stay in the lineup. But when you look around the league, look at the Golden State Warriors with Klay Thompson coming off the bench. Klay Thompson with far more rings on his finger and a player that's been much more important to the core of that team than Tobias Harris has ever been to the Sixers team. He had the self-respect and the ability to put the team first, to swallow his pride and understand that is the best decision for that Warriors team for him to come off the bench. I don't know if Tobias Harris holds those same traits. And some of this, I think, is much more about, obviously, you want to talk about what the outlook is, who's replacing them. If you're asking my full perspective, what my starting five would be right now in Joel Embiid's absence, it would be Tyrese Maxey at the 1, Buddy Hield at the 2, DeAnthony Melton at the 3. I know we're going small. Nico Batum at the 4, and B-Ball Paul at the 5. That, to me, gives this team a better chance to win games than Tobias Harris in the lineup. Now, the best case scenario is obviously that Tobias turns this around, that he can find stride. There are ups and downs in his game, that we have these bad Tobias stretches. At the end of the day, he is what he is. And what he is a painfully average player who is paid too much to deliver more than he's capable of. That he's the highest paid player in NBA history to never make an All-Star game. These are not good traits. These are not good things that you want attached to your resume. But the bottom line is this is a necessary evil these Sixers have to deal with until the conclusion of the season. I'm not going to get overly caught in ragging down into Tobias, even though I have for the past couple minutes, because the bottom line is this is just something that they have to get through. We understand the cap space situation, that the real, I guess, saving grace of him being here is the future flexibility that it brings on by allowing that contract to come off the books, and we will see how Daryl Morey addresses that. But the bottom line is this team still has to find a way to stay on track and find their way in the playoffs this year. That the outlook for this team drastically changes the second Joel Embiid steps back on the floor. But I did want to note how much the outlook has already shifted just 3 games post All-Star break. That I did a little breakdown of what the chances of their playoffs, looking at 2 different outlooks, their calculations for what seeding the Sixers could be, and it's already shifted pretty significantly. So I want to begin with this here. These coming from playoffstats.com. So as you can see, they're looking at these numbers here. These Sixers have a 10% chance of landing the 4 seed according to their calculations, a 15% chance of securing the 5th seed, a 19% chance of scoring the 6th seed. So all those numbers down drastically. And to round this out, they give the highest chance of the 8th seed at 24%, and the 7th seed at 22%, the 9th seed all the way down at 4%. But that's a pretty stark change. And I'm going to read off what the numbers were from this same website. I'm going to do the same thing with Basketball Reference, but for playoffstatus.com. I'm going to read them next to each other. So these numbers compared to what they are now, these are the numbers dating back to at the All-Star break here. At the All-Star break, that playoffstatus.com gave the Sixers a 12% chance of securing the 3 seed, a 16% chance of securing the 4 seed, an 18% chance of securing the 5 seed, a 18% chance of securing the 6th seed, a 17% chance of the 7th seed, and an 18% chance of the 8th seed there. So already a pretty drastic shift that when you're looking at those numbers at the All-Star break, that the highest numbers were the 5 and 6 seed at 18% each. Now looking at how it currently constructed, a 22% chance at the 7th seed and a 24% chance at the 8th seed. Now I mentioned at the time that I thought these calculations were a little bit high. Frankly, I don't know if it's embedded in the calculation that there's no Joel Embiid or that they're facing some of the stiffest competition that they have all year. And it is frustrating that the Sixers essentially did this a little backwards through no fault of their own, that they had Joel Embiid for the easier part of their schedule, that they could have ripped off wins. I think even without Joel, against some of these teams that they beat up on, the Charlotte Hornets and Detroit Pistons of the world, that even without Joel, I don't think the Sixers team would have a real issue with. But now, without the big fella, you got to take on the top dogs, and ultimately they got to find a way to keep their head afloat. And I did want to note Basketball Reference as well. I did think their calculation were a little bit closer to the way I would look, even though I think the reality is a little bit in the middle of both these. But to look at Basketball Reference here, as you can see, these Sixers still giving them a 95.5% chance at the playoffs. For seeds 1 through 6, it is still giving these Sixers a 71% chance. But for what it should be noted that at the All-Star break, Basketball Reference gave them a 98.1% chance at making the playoffs and an 85.9% chance at securing between the 1 and 6 seeds. So already pretty significant shift there, about 15 percentage points that it has dipped. And for what it's worth, that at the All-Star break, the 5 seed with the most likely outcome according to Basketball Reference at 24.4%. Looking at the current odds that it is based, they're giving a 24.7% chance at the 5 seed, a 23.4% chance at the 6 seed, a 16.1% chance at the 7 seed, an 8.4 chance at the 8 seed. So obviously a little more optimistic outlook here when talking about the Basketball Reference numbers. As I mentioned, I think it's a little bit in the middle of both of these. In reality, it's fully on the Sixers' plate that if they can find a way to win some ball games, they can stay afloat. But I did want to touch on the standings as a whole. I know you can see them scrolling at the bottom here. Nobody's catching these Celtics. They hold a 7.5 game lead for that 1 seed. The Cavs right behind them at 2. They're just a game ahead of the Bucks for that number 2 seed right now. Would not surprise me at all if the Bucks do catch them. I do expect the Cavaliers to slip a little bit in the second half of the season. But really the area of the standings that we are interested in is that Sixers at the 5 seed with a 33-24 record, 12 game backs of the Celtics for that 1 seed, just a half game above the Pacers for that number 5, or for the 6 seed the Pacers currently sit at. And looking beyond that, the Heat with a 31-25 record, that they're a game and a half behind the Sixers. The Magic tied with them as far as the standings, that their record sitting at 32-26. So they've played 2 more games there, but the same amount of games back. The Sixers can afford for one of the Pacers, Heat, and Magic to pass them, so they stick in that top 6. But if more than that, that would be problematic for this team. Now, in any case, that I'm not as lost in the standings race as a lot of people, and I've been overly optimistic in their ability to stay afloat than most, that I am confident this team will just luck their way into some wins, that I think they're going to have some random shooting variance nights where they're able to outshoot teams, and I think ultimately they're still figuring out how to play in a way that they have not, and finally they're returning to full health in a way that they haven't. That I think DeAnthony Melton returning to the floor is more than just a throwaway story, that they need his skill set within the Sixers team as currently constructed, and obviously, everything changes when Joel Embiid does return to the floor. That I'm still completely optimistic and fully expect him to step back and play in a Sixers uniform at some point this season. And even if it is the case that they slip all the way down, there's no team in the NBA that wants to face the Sixers in the first round. Even if it's the Boston Celtics, you can't be looking at a rested Joel Embiid with the rest of this roster and thinking that's exactly who we want in the 1 seed or as the 1 seed. That would be a brutal punishment for having a borderline historic season as far as their record of play and then facing the Sixers team in the first round. That doesn't mean I'm taking the Sixers to beat them or I'm overly optimistic about that, but just putting the point out there that regardless of what the opponent is, if you have a healthy and rested Joel Embiid, we'll see what his level of fitness is at that point of time, and you have everybody else as currently constructed, this team has a fighting chance. So it's not great to see them sliding down the standings, not great to see the losses. They have another tough one against Boston tomorrow night. I'm not optimistic about them getting the win in that one either, which brings in these standings once again and how frustrating it can be for them to continue to slip down. But the bottom line is there's still a decent amount of basketball left to be played. We will see how the Sixers team shakes it up. And I am hoping that Nick Nurse continues to get more creative in his decision-making, and that can lead to some success. Appreciate all you guys for tuning into this video here. Make sure you're smashing that subscribe button to keep the Sixers Digest family growing. Got a ton of big plans coming up as we head into this final push for the season, head into playoff mode. Going to have some fun crossover stuff with some of the other Digest media people, Knicks Digest and Sixers and Celtics Digest out there specifically that I'm hopeful for. But either way, stay posted for all that. Drop a like and let me know your thoughts in the comments, and I'll be talking with you next time right here on Sixers Digest. Peace.